Twitter serves me up the dumbest articles from sort of the celebrity universe. And occasionally it forces me to comment. One of those articles is one from BuzzFeed today. This article is about the show Love is Blind. Now, I've never seen an episode of Love is Blind, but I'm aware of the premise. So the basic premise of Love is Blind is that you separate a couple, they don't see each other, they date each other without seeing each other, and then you reveal them to one another, and they get to decide whether to continue dating or not. I believe this is the premise of the show. Now, one of the things about the show that's a little bit rigged is that the people are generally pretty good looking, right? They don't have a lot of bad looking people on the show, which means that at least people have a shot of staying together, right? Because it would be a completely different show if it were not designed that way, as we'll discuss in just one moment. But apparently BuzzFeed has now figured out that they don't have enough overweight and unattractive people on the show. And they're wondering why. So there are a couple of reasons. The first one is obvious. People like watching attractive people on TV. This is why all of your weather people are good looking. You're going to have like a hideously ugly weather person. Because, I mean, sorry to break it to you, but human beauty is attractive to other people. I know that this is very controversial stuff in today's day and age. We're supposed to pretend that extraordinarily overweight, like morbidly obese Sports Illustrated models are just as attractive as the ones who are, in really good shape and good looking. But that's not the way actually the human lizard brain works. And so if you are programming for TV and you wish people to watch your show because this is how you make your money, you're going to put more attractive people on the TVs as opposed to dramatically unattractive people. And it's just general rule of TV programming. There's another reason as well. And it's funny to watch everybody talk around this because no one's allowed to say the truth about why Love is Blind is constructed the way Love is Blind is constructed. So according to BuzzFeed, Vanessa Lachey from her hosting gig on Netflix smash hit Love is Blind, which she shares with husband Nick Lachey. If you've watched the show, you've probably definitely noticed that the group of contestants who make it to air don't reflect body diversity, like at all. In a recent interview with Insider, Vanessa tried to explain why the show doesn't embrace body diversity in any real way. Her answer was not great. In response to being asked about the show's lack of body diversity, Vanessa said she sometimes thinks certain contestants don't make it past the pods portion of the show because they're insecure. Their whole life, they've been so insecure about being themselves because of this crazy swipe generation we are in and this catfishing world that we're in, they're afraid to be themselves. Vanessa went on to say she believes everyone is given a fair shot in the casting process. She also wonders if they truly don't have enough time in those 2 weeks to find themselves, A, and then B, themselves to find that spouse. So she's making excuses, obviously. So the BuzzFeed person calls it out and says, so if I'm reading this right, Vanessa's reason why the show does not include diverse bodies is because some contestants are simply too insecure about their bodies to appear on the show. Something tells me we might be getting a clarification from Vanessa in the future regarding her comments, or maybe not. Either way, we'll be seeing if Love is Blind goes in a more diverse direction. Okay, so I'm now going to say the part that's unpopular to say, because that's my job, and I get paid for it. So why exactly are there not a bunch of fatsos on Love is Blind? The answer is because it completely changes the nature of the show. Okay, the entire premise of Love is Blind is that you're supposed to know the personality, get to know the person, and then you're not going to care about what they look like. But the show also knows you really care about what people look like. Okay, when it comes to dating and mating, it turns out people like people of similar levels of physical attractiveness. And so the show would completely implode, like immediately, if you were to include in the sample size a bunch of very unattractive people. This is particularly true for the males who are looking at the females. Okay, this is not me speaking. This is evolutionary biology speaking. What all studies tend to show is that women are less concerned with how men look than men are concerned with how women look, which is not a particular shock because the metrics that women use when they are determining whether they can successfully mate with somebody are things like success level, right? Actually, financial success. Whether the person is smart or not comes up a lot. Attractiveness comes up in sort of self-polling, but what the data tend to show is that it is not necessarily the number one priority for women about men that they date, which is why you'll see good-looking women sometimes with kind of mediocre-looking dudes. However, the reverse tends not to hold true. Men tend to look, first and foremost, because of the evolutionary lizard brain, they tend to look at the physical attractiveness of women. They do. Because again, evolutionary biology dictates that humans are polygynous, meaning that women are very selective about the men that they mate with because those men may end up being the bearers of the genetic material that they carry to term. And so they have to be very careful because women produce fewer reproductive cells, right? They produce fewer eggs than men do produce sperm, right? A woman who has an egg fertilized and has to spend 9 months, 10 months carrying this baby all the way to term and then raise it. So you have to be pretty particular about the person you choose to mate with, whereas men can go willy-nilly and produce as much sperm as they want and spread their seed everywhere and make sure that they are impregnating thousands and thousands of women, right? Which is the way that it works in most of the mammalian kingdom. We in human civilization, we've developed cultures that value monogamy for a variety of reasons, and that is a good thing. However, what that tends to mean is that men, evolutionarily speaking, are seeking to reproduce with lots and lots of women. However, if men are forced to settle down with a woman, they want a good-looking woman. Okay, and this is just evolution. We'll get to more on why Love is Blind is structured the way that it is. We'll get to that in a second. First, let's talk about protecting your online data. Does it make sense that the same company that controls half of online retail also passively eavesdrops on your private conversations at home and monitors your data and monetizes that data? Big tech, they're not your friends. They are seeking to make money off of you. Well, you don't have to give them that privilege. Instead, put a layer of protection between your online activity and these tech juggernauts. That's why I use ExpressVPN. Think about how much of your life is on the internet. Sadly, every site you visit, video you watch, or message you send gets tracked and data mined. But when you run ExpressVPN on your device, the software hides your IP address, something big tech can use to personally identify you. So ExpressVPN makes your activity harder to trace and sell to advertisers. ExpressVPN also encrypts 100% of your internet data to keep you safe from hackers and eavesdroppers on your network. What I like most about ExpressVPN is how easy it is to use. Download the app on your phone or computer, tap one button, you are protected. ExpressVPN does all of this without slowing your connection. That's why it's rated the #1 VPN service by TechRadar, The Verge, and countless others. Stop handing over your personal data to the big tech monopoly that mines your activity and sells your information. Protect yourself with the VPN I trust to keep me safe online. Visit expressvpn.com/BenYT and get 3 extra months for free. So if if the women in the show, let's say that half the women were very good looking and half the women were 350 pounds and 5'1". Okay, let's say that were the case. If that were the case, do you think there would be first of all, the camera pressure to be like, oh man, I love you and I'm willing to, first of all, the camera pressure would be intense and it would be a very different show. But second of all, if they're actually expected to date women who they found wildly physically unattractive, do you think that would be the same show in any way? Sure, you would have the Time magazine cover Hero Man of the Year for the man who decided to stick with the woman who he thought was very physically unattractive because they just were soulmates, right? Which is the sort of My Big Fat Greek Wedding fantasy about how romance actually works. But in reality, does anybody believe that? And so, of course, they rigged the show. They rigged the show so there's an actual possibility that the two people end up together. That's not a shock. Reality TV rigs these things all the time. I remember when I was significantly younger, there was a show on the air called Joe Millionaire. And the entire premise of the show was sort of the reverse. It was that women were dating a guy they thought was a millionaire. At the end, it was going to be revealed that he was not a millionaire, and they would have to decide whether to stay with him or not. And there was only one problem with the show. They got to the last episode, and you were waiting for the punchline, which was the woman was going to find out that the guy was dirt poor and was like a janitor or something, and she was going to dump him. And everybody's going to laugh, right? That was the whole premise of the show. And instead, they decided that what they were going to do is basically give the woman like a $50,000 to $100,000 ring to show up to meet the guy, right? Because they weren't willing to go with the consequences of the show. So the reason the show isn't constructed this way is because they are not willing to go with the consequences of a show that were constructed differently. The consequences of a show in which physical attractiveness was brought to bear as a serious consideration would be an incredibly different show. And again, what I'm saying here is not rooted in prejudice. It is not rooted in sexism. It is rooted in evolutionary biology. One of my favorite studies ever. This is a great study. Okay, this happened back in 1982. 2 professors deployed college women of various levels of attractiveness to a bar to proposition some 48 men for alternatively a date, going back to her apartment, or going to bed with her. And now, again, this is just about having sex, basically, this particular study. It's not about long-term mating. Long-term mating, men are interested in physical attractiveness at a very, very high level. When it comes to short-term sex, that would be a different show, right? That would be like a basic dating show. As Amy Schumer says, if a woman wants to have sex anytime, all she has to do is be available. That's Amy Schumer saying that. That's true. Okay, but women look for something different. They're looking for long-term relationship material, and that means they're not looking at physical attractiveness nearly as much in long-term relationship kind of studies. But what this study shows is that men are generally looking at the physical. Right? Men are only interested predominantly at the beginning, if they are stupid, in the physical, which is why you need marriage, right? This is why monogamy is a good thing. It forces you to think about longer term issues. But Love is Blind is not forcing you to think about that. And by the way, there still has to be a baseline level of physical attractiveness in a marriage in order for that marriage to work, in order for a relationship to work. What this study shows is that it's really funny because, again, men and women do not think the same. This is the underlying rationale to why Love is Blind works the way that it does. In that study, where the professors deployed college women of varying levels of attractiveness to a bar to proposition men, what they found is that half of men said yes to the date, 70% said yes to just going to bed. And when they asked the women, so they did the same experiment in reverse, a bunch of men went into a bar and propositioned women. 50% of the women said yes to the date. 0% said yes to going to bed, which is a vast difference between men and women. By the way, the comments that men had about why they wouldn't go to bed with a woman, the 30% who said they would not, They said, I'm already married. Can we do it tomorrow? For the women, the answers, this is in the study, are, quote, you've got to be kidding, or what is wrong with you? Leave me alone. And men and women are very different. And Love is Blind understands that, which is why it's programmed the way that it is. Physical attractiveness matters an awful lot to men. It would be an incredibly different show if half of the women were wildly physically unattractive. So you want to know why there's not biodiversity? It's because, number one, people like watching attractive people. And number two, the entire tenor and approach of the show is wildly different if men are confronted with people they find vastly physically unattractive on camera. It is not the same show. In fact, it's humiliating to a lot. It would actually be really bad for women who don't feel confident in their body to have a show in which men are routinely rejecting women because of their body. It would actually be really counterproductive and bad, I think, for a lot of those women. I hope you enjoyed that clip from The Ben Shapiro Show. If you did, go ahead and hit that subscribe button so you stay up to date with all our future content.